We'll start the meeting in just 1 minute. On va commencer la réunion dans une minute. If anyone would like to speak to any item that's on the agenda, if you could please sign up just under the television screen at the door, and we'd be pleased to hear your presentation on items that are on the agenda. So we'll start in 1 minute. Welcome to the Finance and Economic Development Committee meeting of the 6th of February. Bienvenue à le Comité des finances et de développement économique pour le 6 février 2018. Councillor Monette is on his way, we've been told. Councillor Harder is speaking at an FCM conference down at the Shaw Centre, and she hopes to make it by the end of the meeting, but not entirely sure. Declarations of interest. Oh, here comes Councillor Moffat. Councillor Moffat, you have a motion on Twin Elm Rugby Park.
Yes, I do, actually. Thanks for having me. So this is something that arose at Agricultural Affairs Committee on Thursday. It just involves the capital facilities agreement that the city has with the Twin Elm Rugby Park, and it's to extend that agreement. I'll just read the motion. So, be it resolved at the recommendation of the Agricultural Affairs Committee, this item be added to the agenda of the meeting, Finance and Economic Development Committee on February 6th, as the solar panels addressed in the motion would be required to be in place on or before March 31st, 2018 for the applicant in respect to the solar panels to qualify for the grant. So I don't know, do we waive the rules to add the motion?
On waiving of the rules, carried.
So whereas the former city of Nepean, having obtained the approval of the Ottawa Transition Board, approved a municipal capital facilities agreement and associated bylaw in respect of the Twin Elm Rugby Park at 4075 Twin Elm Road on June 15th, 2000 for the provision of the municipal recreational facilities, and whereas the municipal capital facilities regulation 60306 requires that the municipality own or agree to purchase the recreation facilities as part of the approval of the municipal capital facilities agreement, and the City of Ottawa is to acquire the Twin Elm Rugby Park on December 31st, 2025. And whereas the owner of the Twin Elm Rugby Park wishes to enter into a 20-year agreement with the Ottawa Renewable Energy Cooperative for the installation of solar panels upon the building located at the park, and whereas staff support the installation and placement of the solar panels during the period that the park remains in private ownership, therefore be it resolved that Agricultural Affairs Committee recommends that Finance and Economic Development Committee recommend the Council approve an amendment to the agreement of purchase and sale such that the date of closing of the municipal capital facilities term be modified from December 31st, 2025 to December 31st, 2039. Delegate to the General Manager, Recreation, Cultural and Facility Services, and the Director of Corporate Real Estate Office, the authority to finalize and approve the terms of any required amending agreements in consultation with the City Treasurer's Office, and authorize the City Clerk and Solicitor to forward any required amending bylaws to Council.
Okay, and staff are in support of this, I believe. I think Mr. Chenier is in agreement. On the motion, carried. Okay, thank you, Councillor Moffat. So declaration of interest, déclaration de conflit d'intérêt, confirmation of minutes, adoption de procès verbaux pour le 5 décembre 2017 for the 5th of December 2017, carried. Motion by Councillor El-Shantiri to waive the rules to add the presentation on LRT. Councillor El-Shantiri.
Thank you, Your Worship. Therefore, be it resolved that Finance Economic Development Committee waive Section 83, subsection 4, a procedure bylaw to receive a presentation from staff with respect to the light rail transit stage 1, and dispense with requirement of staff to provide a separate written report on this presentation.
On the motion, carried. So since we have a presentation, we'll come back to LRT and we'll go through the consent agenda. The next item is Office of City Clerk and Solicitor, attendance at FCM, AMO, and other associations that we're members of. Carried. Next item is item 3, appointment to the Bank Street BIA, nomination au Conseil de gestion de la zone d'amélioration commerciale de la rue Bank. Carried. Appointment to the Canada Central Business Improvement Area, nomination au Conseil de gestion de la zone d'amélioration commerciale du Centre Canada. Carried. Item 5 is appointment to the Wellington West Business Improvement Area, nomination au Conseil de gestion de la zone d'amélioration commerciale de Wellington West. Carried. Item 6, status, excuse me, update, Finance and Economic Development Committee inquiries for the period ending the 26th of January. Received. Corporate Services Department, Direction Générale des Services, delegation of authority, acquisition and sale of land and property. Received. Item number 8, surplus land declaration, 5964 Frank Kenny Road. There's a technical amendment that I have from Councillor Blais.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, simply to change the word Osgood to, or sorry, the word Nepean to the word Osgood in the therefore be it resolved.
So on the motion, carried. On the motion as amended, carried. Planning, Infrastructure and Economic Development Department, Public Transit Infrastructure Fund, approved project. Oh, okay. So we have a public delegation, I've been told, for Frank Kenny Road. So we will come back to that as the first item since it's public, so we'll get back to that. So the Public Transit Infrastructure Fund, this is the federal fund. There are some tweaks in the report, I believe. So on the report on item number 9, carried. Britannia Village, Ottawa River flood protection, setting of the special service charge. There's a presenter, so we'll come back to that. Additional infrastructure funding for the renewal of tax-supported assets. I think, does Councillor Moffat have another motion? Yes, Councillor Hubley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Whereas a portion of Stonehaven Road currently included in line 23, document 1 of the additional infrastructure funding for renewal of tax-supported assets report was previously resurfaced in 2017, therefore be it resolved that a portion of Stonehaven Drive that is proposed to be resurfaced in line 23 of document 1 be changed to being the portion between Furlong Crescent West and Stone Meadow Drive. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so we have a delegation on that, so we'll come back to that as well. Anyone else have motions on that one? Nope. Okay, so we'll just go to the first item we have delegations for, which is Frank Kenny Road. So we have Kristen Hunter. Is Ms. Hunter here? No? Okay, so on the report, carried. The next item where there's a delegation is the Britannia Village Ottawa River Flood Protection, Jonathan Morris from the Britannia Village Community Association. And Mr. Morris, if you'd like to come to the table, and you have 5 minutes for your presentation, and welcome.
Thank you. So my name is Jonathan Morris. I'm president of the Britannia Village Community Association. So that's the community that's affected by the floodplain levy. I'm here to request that the motion be deferred to the next meeting. The reason being that we only just found out about this meeting and about the report that recommends the levy. And the issue is not that, you know, going back, the levy was originally proposed back in, not proposed, voted on by the community back in 2006, when we decided to, in order to have the floodplain protections put in place, we as a community voted to pay for half of the cost of that berm that was put in place. At the time, that was $400,000. We agreed to pay for half. roughly $195,000. It's taken 12 years to put the berm in place, during which time the cost of the berm has changed. But we're still committed to paying our share of the $195,000. That's not in question, and we're you know, if it happens this tax year, that's fine also. This report, though, I just found out about on the weekend. The rest of the community hasn't seen. We haven't had a chance to look at it. It talks about how that $195,000 is going to be portioned amongst the residents. And I haven't had myself a chance to go through it in deep detail. But, you know, a handful of questions have emerged. Hopefully they can all be dealt with fairly quickly by talking it through with staff, and we can come back to the next committee meeting, whenever that is, and say, yeah, everything looks good. But we just haven't had that chance yet to review the report and talk to staff and get our questions answered to make sure that how this levy is being implemented is being done in a way that's consistent to what was agreed in 2006 and is fair to all the residents there. So again, my request is that we just defer this motion to the next meeting so that we get a chance to go through the report and address any questions that we have with staff.
Just a question of the treasurer, Ms. Similuk, is deferring this affect the tax billing cycle for 2018?
It shouldn't affect it. We send this would be on the final tax bill, which we issue in May. We have to be done, basically, all the calculations by the beginning of April in order to have that happen. So we basically have about a month.
Councillor Taylor, I remember dealing with this as an MPP like 12 years ago, so it shouldn't be a surprise.
There's been several, multiple mayors, multiple councillors, multiple MPPs involved in this file.
But it worked last year.
Yes, it did.
By and large.
Yes,
so
we were
pretty good.
We were happy
deal.
to have it in place just in time.
Yeah. So, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, Jonathan and I had an opportunity to chat last night. You know, we kind of are of a bit of a different view about this. I believe that, you know, residents knew this was coming. Certainly the affected residents knew this was coming for quite some time. In fact, so long that some of them have actually changed. They've moved out and new residents have moved in. You know, I wasn't inclined to support deferral, but if the treasurer is telling us that it's not going to have an impact on the tax roll, I'm pretty confident that any questions or concerns that residents have can be cleared up between now and council, but and it's not going to materially change the report. But if the treasurer is telling us that there's no technical impediment to deferral, then I'm happy to support the community's request for deferral.
I see no reason this can't be dealt with fairly quickly.
Mr. El-Shantiri.
I would say, Mr. Mayor, since the area council suggesting there's plenty of time between now and the next council meeting, and that will give him enough time to deal with this issue. And the next council, I think, will give the council enough time to meet with yourself and other members of the community. We don't have to defer this and delay it more. So I would recommend, I will support my colleague to, between now and the next council meeting, should give plenty of time, Mr. Mayor.
Just so I'm clear, this is basically $195,000 over 10 years, and you have a concern with the allocation. Wouldn't it be based on the value of the house?
Yes,
So
it's based on the value of the house, but in 2006, it was stated that it would be based upon 2006 assessments. This report says it's 2017 assessments. I don't know if that's a big deal or not. The original survey of interest that was put out was to 101 properties. Those are the properties that were considered to be benefiting properties from the flood protection. Now the report says there's 96. So, you know, there's probably perfectly reasonable reasons for this. I just want to understand them.
Councillor Taylor?
So by way of moving forward, Mr. Mayor, may I suggest, perhaps a middle ground? So I'm pretty confident that if we get the staff in the room with Mr. Morris and other, affected parties or interested parties, between now and council, we can probably answer questions. If we get to council and we're at a major impasse, I'm happy to step up at council and ask for a deferral at council.
Okay. I think that's fair. It gives you a little over a week to figure out if we can solve the problems or answer the questions, and if not, Councillor Taylor could move deferral at the council meeting for the next FEDCO meeting.
So at council, council can defer the decision at that point?
That's correct. Okay, so thank you very much for your presentation. And on the report, carried. Thank you. Okay, our next item with a member of the public is Mr. Holmes here. No? Okay. So Councillor Hubley's motion, carried. And on the report, carried. All right, so I think we're at LRT. On behalf of my colleague Stephen Blais, Chair of the Transit Commission, and Keith Eglai, Chair of our Transportation Committee, I want to welcome you to FEDCO today, where we'll receive an update on Stage 1 of our light rail transit system plan. On July 14th, 2011, some time ago now, Ottawa City Council, in an historic vote, decided unanimously to proceed with Stage 1 of LRT, now known as the Confederation Line. C'était une décision vraiment historique, y compris la construction d'un tunnel sur le centre-ville, un débat qui durait depuis plus de 50 années. It's taken about 7 years or 80 months to get this very exciting point, to get to this very exciting point in Ottawa's history. Today, I take great pride in announcing that Ottawa's Confederation Line will open by the end of November 2018. That is when our city's transit customers can plan to start boarding the Confederation Line. D'ici la fin du mois de novembre 2018, nos clients de transport commun pourront monter à bord du nouveau train léger de la station Blair à la station Tunney's. Following my remarks, staff will outline what they have learned with their ongoing discussions with RTG. This includes RTG's commitment to hand over the system to OC Transpo on November 2nd, 2018. The trains will move into full customer service only after an independent safety auditor verifies the system's safety, reliability, and readiness for public use. After this point, OC Transpo will oversee the commissioning of the entire system. As we all share in the current and future benefits of this investment, we must be prepared to speak frankly about the challenges that have led us to setting the LRT launch date roughly 6 months later than originally projected. The city's understanding is that the Rideau Street sinkhole proved to be a bigger challenge than RTG originally thought, and Mr. Manconi will be elaborating further on these issues when he provides staff's perspective. The largest and most complex infrastructure investment in our city's history will transform the way Ottawa residents travel within our great city. It is providing thousands of construction jobs, boosting confidence in our city's economy. Ce projet, le plus important programme d'infrastructure de notre histoire, crée des milliers d'emplois et augmente la confiance dans notre économie. It has showcased the willingness of all levels of government to invest in the transformation of our city. Together, the city, the province of Ontario, and the government of Canada are investing over $2.1 billion to build the first stage of LRT. That's 12.5 kilometers of environmentally friendly rail from Blair Road in the east to Tunney's Pastures in the west. And we're not done yet. We're working flat out to procure Stage 2 of LRT, which will create an even more economical and environmental benefit to residents citywide. Nous travaillons déjà très fort pour prolonger les bénéfices de la ligne de la Confédération à un plus grand nombre de résidents de la ville d'Ottawa. Once fully operational, the O-Train system, comprised of the Confederation Line running east-west and the Trillium Line running north-south, will span over 59 kilometers of rail and include 41 stations. It will accommodate up to 24,000 people per hour in each direction, more than twice the number of people OC Transpo serves today. When Stage 2 of the city's O-Train system opens for revenue service in 2023, approximately 70% of the city's population will be within 5 kilometers of rail. Aligning with provincial and federal priorities on the environment, light rail transit will reduce Ottawa's greenhouse gas emissions by at least 200,000 tons and criteria air contaminants by more than 5,000 tons annually by 2048. We'll be stretching to go farther, bringing the benefits of transit to more people across Ottawa than originally anticipated. The Confederation Line extensions will build on the core Stage 2 scope, adding in total 28 kilometers of electrified rail to reach Moody in the west and Baseline in the southwest. It will extend through the downtown, reaching all the way to Trim Road in Orleans in the east. LRT will link key employment nodes, our post-secondary institutions, retail, arts, culture, and recreation. Le TLR jouera un rôle de moteur de développement économique de notre région, en plus de mieux protéger notre environnement et la qualité de l'air. Stage 2 will save $7.1 billion in commuting costs for local residents and will generate over 21,000 person-years of employment. Today, you will hear details about the construction and our contractual relationship to protect taxpayers. You'll also be reminded that any cost overruns are at RTG's expense thanks to the fixed-price contract negotiated by the city and approved by council. For instance, contrary to what some have suggested, the 2018 budget is not affected by this 6-month delay because any additional cost to operate will be borne by RTG, the private sector. Staff will continue to carefully monitor the project schedule to ensure Ottawa residents get a world-class transit system that is safe, convenient, and reliable. Today marks a significant milestone towards realizing our transit vision for Ottawa's future. Il est important pour moi d'assurer que les contribuables sont bien protégés grâce à notre accord avec le groupe RTG, c'est-à-dire le contrat à prix fixe négocié par la Ville et adopté par le Conseil municipal. I'd now like to ask staff to proceed with their update on Stage 1 of Confederation Line. I believe Mr. Manconi will be doing the presentation, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Bonjour à tous. Thank you, Monsieur le Président. City staff and RTG are very excited and focused on this transformational project that will change our city forever. And I remind you that on opening day, the Confederation Line will be the busiest LRT in North America. Mr. Mayor, members of committee, there are 3 principles that have been infused in all our discussions with RTG, and you'll see them as I walk through this deck, and they're all equal and important. The first is that we have reminded RTG that they are fully required to meet all the commitments of the $2.1 billion investment. The second is the safety and the reliability of the system is paramount. We will not move 1 inch on that. And lastly, the protection of our taxpayers through our award-winning P3 contract will be front and center. The $2.1 billion light rail transit project runs from Tunney's to Blair. The model that was used when we awarded this contract was called an AFP, an alternate financing procurement model. And what that does, and it's foundational to everything that you're going to hear today, is it includes designing, building, financing, and maintaining the system. It's designed to allocate the construction, geotechnical, tunneling, schedule, and financial risk to RTG. And it includes a 30-year maintenance agreement that we don't talk about, but after the system is in operation, there is a 30-year maintenance agreement that goes over to a firm that's called RTM. The contract stipulates a revenue service availability date, that's RSA, and that is when RTG hands over the completed system to the city so it can decide when to put it into service. Now, the contract required that RTG confirm 6 months in advance of the May 24th prescribed date in the contract that they would achieve the revenue service availability date. That is a clear notice that they were required to provide to us on November 24th, advising us whether or not they would achieve that date. That notice period allows the city, the 6 months allows us to prepare and deploy the train so it's fully ready and for our public to use reliably. Now, the last point is also important in that the contract does have provisions for the consideration of a revised RSA date with potential financial consequences to RTG. And I just wanted to clarify that because there's some questions as to whether or not this is permitted, and it is. Now, what does revenue service availability look like? The requirements are prescriptive. They're defined in the project agreement, which is the contract, and they're very, very clear, and we are going to stick to all of them. The first one is the things that you can see, feel, and touch. It's the completion of all the fixed components, the stations, the rail lines, the catenary system, which is the overhead wire system that runs electricity to the vehicles, the mechanical systems, the electrical systems. Those are out there. You can see them every single day. The second one is the vehicle completion. We need 34 vehicles that are fully tested and commissioned. They need to meet the Canadian content rules, the system integration, and safety certificates. The third point is a very, very important point that you don't see and you can't touch it, but it is critical to moving forward and to putting the train into service, and that's system-wide integration, testing, commissioning, and trial running. Those are the hundreds of systems that all need to talk to each other and work perfectly in order to ensure that we can meet the requirements of providing safe, reliable service to our customers. That's everything from the escalators to the elevators to the next train announcement, the control room, the controls on the trains themselves, ensuring that they stop the thousands of times that they do every day at every single location precisely and accurately, the safety alarms, the fire alarms, the ventilation systems, the emergency subsystems, and so forth. Those systems all need to work, and they need to work as one integrated system-wide system. The assurances, the system assurances, this is the requirement confirmed by an independent safety auditor. Safety is paramount, and we've made it very clear to RTG. We will ensure that safety is at the top of everything that we do, and there is an independent safety auditor that is independent of the city and of RTG that comes in and does an actual certification and says that the system is ready to go and is safe. There's the operating requirements, and you can imagine the hundreds and thousands of pages of manuals, emergency response plans. I know some of you have asked about what do we have, emergency evacuation plans, do we have threat vulnerability analysis. Those all need to be done and certified and reviewed and accepted by the city and the safety auditor. And then there's the maintenance readiness. Once the system is launched, there's a 30-year maintenance agreement with RTM, and we are looking at their maintenance regimes, their rehab plans, the maintenance equipment and personnel, ensuring that that's all in place so that we can continue to operate the system. Now the train moves into full service from Tunney's to Blair once these four things occur. The full testing, commissioning, trial running, and certification are completed and signed off. There's a lot of documentation, thousands of pages of documentation that needs to occur. The independent safety auditor signs off on the safety of the system. Revenue service availability is met. All of the conditions are met. And we, the city, confirm that the system is safe, reliable, and ready for public use. Now, with respect to the RSA date, you will recall at the technical briefing, RTG informed the city that there was a risk that the system would not be ready for May 24th. So they gave us what I described as a conditional RSA notice. And we made it very, very clear to them that that RSA notice has to be clear, it needs to be achievable in their minds, and we can't have any additions or conditions attached to it. So we have had hundreds of discussions with RTG since we received that notice, and that's to look at what their schedule looks like, what their revised schedule entails, and the impacts. We've also brought in independent third-party specialists who have designed, built, and operated rail systems and gave us their views and reviewed in detail the construction schedule that they've put forward to getting us to today's position. And of course, we reminded RTG that we needed to come to FEDCO to share with you the RSA date. Now, as the mayor pointed out, RTG has given us written notice that due to the sinkhole, they believe that that has had an impact on their construction schedule, and that is causing the construction schedule to shift. And as a result, they've proposed this new revenue service availability date of November 2nd. So they've given us that written notice. We are now working with them on the next steps, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. There's the financial consequences, so they have heard loud and clear from myself, the city manager, Mr. Cripps, that the penalties are in play and that we will not deviate from that. There is a revised payment schedule that we need to map out. Obviously, they're stretching out their activities, and we need to ensure that the payment schedule matches that, and they will only get paid for the work that gets completed and signed off by the city. and any other adjustments that need to arise from the RSA availability date. So now that we have a shifted start date, we need to look at what that does on a bunch of things, including the maintenance agreement in terms of the 30-year term. Now, the train goes into service, as I've said, based on safety, reliability of the operational performance, and I want to pause there for a moment because we made it very, very clear to RTG we have the busiest LRT on opening day, and we're not on for a phased opening or what can be termed as a degraded service opening where a partial service level commitment is made. We have told them that what is prescribed in the project agreement, the capacity, the carrying capacity, and the volumes that we need to move through the city will be there. We're not on for a system that is almost ready. We need a fully completed system that meets the project specifications. There's also the retirement of the bus and operational and seasonal considerations that we need to factor into when we put the service out to the public. There will be many discussions, and there have been many meetings with our partners, police, fire, paramedics. They're important because we do trial events with them and mock scenarios to ensure that everybody's ready in the event of a situation. And then we have to deal with the detours. Now, in terms of putting the service out there for the public and ensuring it meets everyone's expectations, there are, while RTG has been very, very busy, OC Transpo has been busy for the last 4 years, literally doing thousands of things to ensure that our organization is transformed and ready to receive the train and run it really well. And that includes everything from managing our employee transitions. We have a layoff that we need to manage, as you know. We need firm dates from RTG. That's why this is important, that we have clarity on where we're going. We need to convert the entire organization and the operation to a multimodal system, and you've seen that. We've been doing that systematically and incrementally. We've done hundreds of changes, and our customers have followed us along graciously through the transformation. And it has been hard on our customers, but we know there's a great outcome coming in terms of when the system's in service. There's the many, many route changes that we've done, and we've recently done a bunch of them in the last service change. Save and accept 3 or 4 routes. We seem to be doing very, very well there, and we're going to adjust the ones that have some issues with them. Educating the public, our Ready for Rail campaign needs to have some hard dates put to it so that we put out the information in a timely manner to your offices, to the public, and to our customers. And there's a wide range of activities behind the scenes that we're undertaking. Now, the protection of the taxpayer is important, and we have an outstanding project agreement. It's an award-winning P3, and it has numerous elements that we will use to ensure that our taxpayers are protected, including the straightforward things such as liquidated damages. That's a clause that if certain things aren't done, we can pursue financial consequences. There's a deferral of the milestone payments. Those are those construction payments, and we will only be paying them for the work that is done. And then there's this third bullet is very, very important. There's a very substantial final payment once RSA is achieved, and it was designed that way to ensure that whoever the proponent is, in this case RTG, is focused on achieving, not only achieving RSA, but achieving all of the requirements of the RSA date, the things that I've outlined in the previous slides. So that's a multi-million-dollar payment that is there, and there's an incentive for RTG to get there and succeed in every element. We will not be issuing monthly maintenance payments to RTG until revenue service is certified. And then we also have control of our payments and cash flow elements because we are the long-term lender, as we've talked about in the past. And then the last bullet's important because some people were asking is that we do have step-in and other rights and remedies in the event of a default, and we are not in that situation, I can assure you of that. So our commitments is Rideau Transit Group will not receive additional financial compensation for a late project completion. To put that bluntly, we will not be rewarding them for being late, and we've made that clear to them. We will only accept delivery of a safe and reliable system, and I will emphasize that reliability over and over again. It needs to pass all of the trial running and all of the system assurances that are built into and prescribed through the project agreement. No transfer of risk back to the city. We used a P3 model for a reason. We wanted the risk to reside with the proponent, and that risk belongs with RTG. They've been paid a premium to have that risk, and it will stay there with them. and all requirements of the project agreement must be met, including quality, reliability, train capacity, station designs, etc. And to make that real for everyone, we have told them, like a new house, when you move in, there may be some touch-up work that we're prepared to accept, but we're not going to have major work being undertaken while the system is launched into service for our customers. So they need to complete all of the work. So the city has every expectation, barring any unforeseen event or an act of God or something like that, that the Rideau Transit Group will achieve the November 2nd date. This is their date, and they need to be focused on ensuring they put the resources, the capacity, and the oversight to making the November 2nd date. We will be in a position to put the trains into service during the month of November sometime, on the condition that they achieve full compliance with the contractual requirements. And our construction schedule is going to be carefully monitored by staff, and the completion dates as we approach them. We will look at service date windows. We're going to identify those, adjust them, and communicate them when we can confirm them. So in terms of our commitments, the taxpayer is protected, and the responsibility and risk has resided and will continue to reside with Rideau Transit Group. Rideau Transit Group will face various financial consequences of late delivery. The project agreement, and we're lucky that we have a very good project agreement, will serve as a framework for the city to seek any direct costs from the contractor. We're going to carefully monitor the project schedule, and we're going to determine and communicate the date when our transit customers can start using the Confed line as the completion date approaches. Thank you, Monsieur le Président.
Great. Thank you very much for your continued good work, John, and your team. I have Councillor Blais. Anyone else? Questions? I've got you, yeah. Okay, Councillor Blais.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Manconi and your team for the hard work you've been doing over the last many years and for the presentation this morning. Obviously, for some time, both the proponent and our team have had confidence in the original date, which obviously has slipped. So what process has your team gone through to give you the level of confidence you have in the November date? Can you expand upon that a little bit for us?
Certainly, as part of our discussions with RTG, the city manager, when we had that conditional RSA notice, we wrote back to them and we identified that we wanted to hear what their new date is and to have access to their detailed construction schedules, and that we would be bringing in not only our team, but the team that we've had on board for many, many months, which is the independent specialists, to come in and look at their schedule, and they needed to show to us that they could achieve that date, not just with a schedule, but that's the what. We wanted to know the how. So how were they going to achieve that date? And I can tell you from a construction perspective, those are some straightforward things. Those are resources, equipment, materials. Where the complexity resides is on the train control systems and all those systems that talk to each other. And so we did a deep dive with them in workshop format to understand their schedule and to understand how they're going to bring extra capacity and resources to meet that date for November 2nd. And there's various works tools out there that exist in terms of looking at probability analysis and techniques on schedule management and so forth. So they've shared that with us.
Excellent, thank you. With the introduction of LRT, there is what I would call significant fleet retirement that has to happen at the same time. Are those older buses going to be putting the maintenance through the summer and early fall, maintenance of the bus fleet into greater level of jeopardy, and how will that affect the availability of those buses? And then obviously, how do you calculate any residual costs associated with that increased maintenance on older buses so that those costs can be transferred to RTG?
We think we're fine there, but that's some of the work that we're doing right now. We're looking at any and all incremental costs. I think on the bus fleet itself, we should be fine. We're scaling back. We're not doing any major refurb on those buses and so forth. And so we will only do the maintenance to ensure that they're safe and reliable. But if there are any incremental costs, we'll certainly look at that. It will be the extension is the summer period, so that's beneficial. If it were winter, I'd be a little bit more worried about the bus fleet. And I don't think it'll have, maybe the treasurer can comment, but I don't think it'll have a major impact on the residual costs because we don't get a lot of money for the bus fleet once it retires. So it's virtually zero on those buses because we run them into the ground by the time they're done.
Sure, yeah, I think that's where I was getting at. If these buses are just about to be retired, our need to maintain them over the summer and into the fall, you know, more parts, more time, et cetera, our cost to do that might go up. And so we're going to be able to calculate the difference in what we thought a typical bus gets versus these older buses might get and transfer that.
Already mobilized the team looking at that, absolutely.
One of the challenges that we face during construction has been the real impact to people in terms of transit detours and traffic detours and how it's linked to the other infrastructure projects we have on the go. So I guess my question is, does this new date impact other infrastructure projects that are currently ongoing or plan to have started and timed for LRT completion in 2018? And how does that affect our traffic detours and patterns for residents over this coming year?
So now that we're an integrated transportation department, I have all the levers in one spot. So Mr. Landry is looking at all that, and his task is to work with Mr. Gontier to make sure that we're not impacting or causing two things: more disruption than we need, or compromising delivery of any of those projects, other projects throughout the city.
Okay. And just one final question, Mr. Mayor. Do you envision that this could in any way impact the start of Stage 2?
Construction of Stage 2, no.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Right, thank you. Councillor Deans, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Manconi, for the presentation. I just want to understand the financial consequences a little more. I do remember early on in this process being told that they really would not be late because the financial impacts were significant. So maybe Mr. O'Connor, if you could just remind us what penalties are in that contract and what triggers them. And I was interested in what Mr. Manconi said about the blame, sort of 6 months of blame all going to the sinkhole, and if we expect to be in litigation over that in the end. I just want to understand more of the financial impacts.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, with regards to liquidated damages, should RTG not make the RSA date, it will be $1 million in liquidated damages.
That's the only consequence? Because I thought, I just seem to remember early on that we were told there were a lot of financial penalties.
It is the only, and penalty is probably the wrong word, liquidated damages in the contract. The treasurer and the general manager have already spoken to previously the variety of other financial implications that can arise with RTG as a result of not making that date, but that's not for legal to comment.
Okay. And the 6 months that they're attributing to the sinkhole, is that reasonable? The sinkhole would have caused a 6-month delay?
So I won't speak on behalf of RTG, but I do know the following. The work that they did to get that sinkhole restored is if you're into engineering, is quite a feat. And you recall, I know they came out and said they weren't worried about the schedule when the sinkhole occurred. And so they put all of the resources, which they've paid for, by the way. We're not paying for that sinkhole restoration. They will pursue that through their insurers and their means, because that risk they own. There was a lot of work that needed to be done, and if you're asking me, am I surprised that there's an impact to the schedule? No, I'm not surprised at all, because the scope and the scale of that sinkhole and the effects on them as an entire organization, where they put a lot of focus and energy to restoring the safety of that area and to be able to come back and retunnel the area and so forth, was massive undertaking. I think what they were doing was, trying to get to where they needed to get to, and they've now realized they can't make it, and they need more time, and the schedule needs to shift.
Mr. Mayor, may I just add, because I'd like to answer the councillor's question on the financial penalties. I think some of us have got caught up in the word of penalties versus costs to RTG, and I think that one of the things that is overlooked is they have to service a huge amount of debt. that they've taken on for this project. And they depend on the city for maintenance payments and the other cash flow payments that they're supposed to get to be able to service their debt. So that means it's coming out of their own pocket, number one. The second piece is that while they're extending the date, they're actually incurring all the labor costs and all the other costs they didn't anticipate to have over a 6-month period that they should have ended on May 24th. So that's a direct cost to them. The city is not paying them for that. And their cash flow is completely disrupted because they need the cash flow to pay all the requirements they have with their contractors and all their commercial agreements they have, and now we're renegotiating or rediscussing the cash flow payments to basically reflect the work that they've done versus these payments that were set in the contract that ended in a big balloon payment on May 24th. So we need to take the word penalty out of it. Number one, they have paid, or they will be paying a penalty of $1 million right off the bat because they missed May 24th. If they miss the next date, they pay another $1 million. And the money that they were counting on getting on May 24th is now redistributed over a 6-month period, which means they have significant carrying costs at no expense to the city. So it's a combination of penalties on liquidated damages and significant financial direct costs to them that they're going to be suffering and eating into their profit margin before they finish that project.
Is there any chance they could become insolvent?
I don't think so. I mean, we've discussed that. I mean, that might be something that legal. We have step-in agreements. We are the long-term lender. We have protections against that, and we're monitoring where they're at. And I think part of the discussions that we're having right now is to ensure that they have enough cash flow to meet their obligations over the summer, and that's what we're going to discuss with them and when those payments will be. We're not giving additional money. There's a set amount of money that has to be paid from now till they finish, which was supposed to be May 24th. That set amount of money is just redistributed the same amount over a longer period of time. So they will get their money and be able to meet their obligations. So we don't want to force them, and that's why we're having that discussion, into a position where they have no cash flow from now till November, because I think that will put them in jeopardy. They're big companies, but they don't like digging into their own pockets to pay for a project of this magnitude.
Are there additional costs to us as well, to the city? Like we were supposed to be, I think, reducing the staff complement. Presumably we have to keep that longer, keep the buses running longer. So who pays for the city? What are the city's additional costs and who pays for them?
So we're mapping all those out. There's some that are trade off each other. So the payments I'm not going to be giving to RTG for their maintenance because of the delay. That will cover our carrying costs for the bus service to continue, and that's staff, the vehicles, and so forth. There are the costs of things such as the detours, keeping the rail office going. We have double costs because we have operators that are being trained on the rail system and still running buses. So we've explained that all to RTG because they have double carrying costs also. They're in the same boat. So those are all those incremental costs that we're going to be mapping out, and we're going to use the project agreement to leverage the costs back to RTG on that. We made it very clear that they need to cover those costs because, as you can appreciate, they're signaling to us that they have costs also, and we've shared with them that we have those costs.
Right. So their new date is November 2nd, and our revenue service date is November 30th. Is that right? Yeah.
No, our revenue, when we launch the train for public use, we still don't have a fixed date on that. We're going to monitor the schedule. It'll be sometime in the month of November.
Okay. So originally, they were supposed to hand over May 24th, and we were supposed to launch the service July 1st. So that's, 5 weeks. Now it sounds like you've condensed that to about 3.5 weeks. Is that enough time?
The July 1st date in the budget was a conservative estimate that myself and the treasurer put in when we were doing the budget last year. We gave ourselves a bit of a buffer. Yes, that 1-month window is enough time in November. But they need to make sure that they get to November 2nd and it's clean and everything that I've outlined in the deck they achieve. So we do have enough time if they make it to November 2nd as prescribed in the agreement.
Okay, and Councillor Blais asked about the impact on Phase 2, but what if they don't make the November 2nd date? Then would that delay the launch of Phase 2?
Knowing what we know right now, there's nothing that looks like it puts stage 2 construction at risk. They're intertwined when they go into service, but they're not in terms of getting to contract award. Stage 2 would start in earnest, I think, Q1 of 2019, or 2019. So there's nothing that we know right now that would compromise that.
Okay. You mentioned when we take it over that there might be, like a house, some touch-ups that still need to be done. What exactly would that look like? What would be included in things that would be acceptable to still need to be done after we accept the system?
Anything that can be determined as a minor deficiency that doesn't impact either safety or reliability of the system. There are some organizations, particularly when they're doing what are called greenfield developments, where there's a line they're putting out to some suburban area that doesn't have the volume that we have, that are prepared to take that one of the redundant elevators isn't working or so forth. We're not on for that because we have such high volumes at all our stations. So we've signaled to them that all the critical components have to be working. And so really it's minor deficiencies. If there's some work they need to do in a parking lot, some landscaping, some touch-ups, some tiles that need to be adjusted, those types of things, but nothing of significance that affects safety or reliability. And there are workarounds you can do on certain things, but we're not too receptive to that because we have a busy system we need to put in service.
Do you have any reason to be concerned about the safety of the workers in the tunnel or the system because of the delay and because RTG is pushing so hard? Like, I've heard they've hired these people called pushers that are actually there to get this done, and they're pushing really hard. And the tunnels talk, and I hear that people are concerned about the pushers are pushing so hard that they think there's a compromise of safety. Are you aware that that's a concern that's being expressed, and are you concerned about that?
So two things. I've heard all those comments. As you know, there's a lot of media coverage over that. What we chose to do was, rather than just hear the noise, we meet with Mr. McKinney on a monthly basis with myself, Mr. Cripps, and Mr. Antonio Estrada. He's the CEO. And Mr. McKinney has direct access to me and Mr. Cripps on any safety issue that he hears. We will escalate that to Mr. Estrada. The second point I want to make very clear is that RTG owns the risk, and that includes all the safety compliance associated with that. So the Ministry of Labor deals with them. They're the constructor, and as Mr. O'Connor will emphasize, we do not want to bleed into that environment at all. We need to be aware of it. And so what we did is, I thought was very innovative. We connected up where the concerns were coming from, and Mr. McKinney was very candid, and he was doing his job, raising some issues. We put him right in front of the CEO of RTG, and while we can't force RTG to do anything, we are aware of Ministry of Labor when they're in the tunnel or on any part of the construction site. Mr. McKinney has been very positive in the last 2 meetings where he has not brought any issues of significance to us or to Mr. Estrada's attention. I know the minister's been down there and so forth, so there's been a lot of eyes out there. Yes, RTG has had some fines that we've heard about and some compliance reports, and my understanding is that they're meeting all those obligations with the Ministry of Labor, and where they disagree, they're challenging them accordingly.
Okay, just one final question on the Ready for Rail campaign. Presumably you're going to either refresh it or extend it, and what's that going to cost?
So no, we throttled down when we heard there was some concerns about November. We're going to refresh it, and we're going to push forward on it once we get these dates all locked in. We don't see any major incremental costs. There will be a bit of an extension, but we'll add that to the list if there are incremental costs and pass that on to RTG.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I need to correct one thing for the record. The $1 million liquidated damages only applies if they miss the November 2nd date. My apologies, because they did send us the new RSA letter, even though because we allowed them to extend it past January 24th, they don't have to pay on liquidated damage for missing the May 24th date. So they would only pay it if they missed the November 2nd date.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brockington, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to staff for this update today. Can you just talk about whether the November 2nd date was negotiable, whether it was that came to you and say it's going to be November 2nd, or whether you sat down with them to look at the remaining work, the variables at play, and or not you could have suggested an earlier date that still met safety and some of the other major issues?
In this environment, we are not on for, nor do I recommend that we negotiate a date with them. It's up to them. They've been paid a hefty sum of money through the P3 contract to assume all and every risk associated with this project. They're obligated to bring the date to us. The May 24th was the only prescribed date we had, and we do not want to be owning the date. They own the date, they own the responsibility and the accountability to come forward with that. What I can tell you is when they put out other dates that seemed unreasonable to the team, we pushed back and challenged them based on the information that they had shared openly with us.
And just to clarify, this project was on time and on schedule up until the sinkhole happened, is that correct? It was the sinkhole that threw this all off the rails?
They have now expressed to us that they believe the sinkhole is the major impact to the change in the schedule. Up until that point, there was no indication to us or to them that they were off schedule.
Thank you. Some of my colleagues had talked about costs that we were not expecting to incur after, let's say, July 1st, some revenues that we're expecting with the LRT opening on time. We talked about this during OC Transpo's budget hearing. We were expecting, Mr. Manconi, you talked about a net increase in ridership, that there would be a ridership bump when the LRT opens. So there were revenues that we were expecting to incur, let's just say mid-year. You've identified that there are ongoing FTE costs because there's a net increase of staff that we were anticipating to shed once we switched from some of the buses to trains, staffing costs, other costs. Why aren't those included in the contract? Because you've just said there were some offsetting costs with payments that don't have to be made that offset some of the increased costs, but why weren't they specifically identified in the contract to cover the city's risk, to cover the city's cost should the project not meet its original handover date?
So the contract had what I've described in the deck, the levers to recover those. Now we're using the project agreement as the framework to recover those costs. We will itemize all of those. To answer your question directly, that's not how P3s work. What they basically do is they outline the risks. They put in all of the incentives to ensure that they meet those dates. You can't anticipate anything but why this contract is award-winning. Tunnel risk was there front and center, and they own that tunnel risk. So now they've come forward and said that the tunnel collapse has caused the schedule change, or the sinkhole has caused the schedule change. So now our position has been clear from day one that any incremental costs they're going to have to also cover. So you don't want to be that specific because you can't anticipate all those things, but then you'll just be incurring even additional costs. So the leverage that we have is it appears we have all the tools at our disposal, including our lender role, which is also very powerful.
How will the information about the net impact of Transpo be publicly communicated? Will be at a future Transit Commission meeting?
The Treasurer and I will discuss. We think we're going to add up all of those elements and we'll bring something forward. We have other things that we need to bring we're not sure, we're working with Mr. O'Connor, which committee. There's the severance costs that we've always said were outside of this whole process. We need to bring that forward to you. So we're mapping all that out and we'll bring that forward. We think there's going to be a one-time list of all the adjustments and hopefully it comes out to be cost neutral.
Thank you. And my final question, it's been asked by Councillor Haynes and I believe Blais, but just to clarify, this has come up in my community as well. You've clarified, sir, that there's no impact to phase 2 with respect to the construction, but can I just ask after today to get a list of all the work that's already happening with phase 2, which the delay of phase 1 really doesn't have any impact, but just to illustrate to the public all the work that's already happening, it's not impacted by a delay to of phase 1, that we're not supposed to start, we're talking about closing the Trillium line in 2020. That's still over 2 years away, but I think it would be good to mention all the good work that's already happening with Phase 2 so people know that it's not impacted. Is that possible?
Yes, we can give you a high-level document. We just need to be careful. We're in procurement now, but things such as the 417 widening and all those things that are bundled with that will be proceeding. There's nothing indicating right now that this is going to compromise us in that regard. So I'll get Mr. Swale to give you a high-level summary so that you have that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Hubley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One question for you is, will this, you're saying this isn't going to have any impact on our costs, so the contingency fees that were in the original budget, we're still well within that contingency? We haven't used it all?
No, we haven't spent the entire contingency, and I guess one of the things, just in response to what Councillor Brockington was asking about the construction of the contract, we actually have, at the start of it, we established a risk register, which identified what we thought were all the potential risks and put a dollar cost against them. And so the delay was one of those, a potential not meeting May 24th was one of those risks. So that's built into the risk register, and then we use the contingency to fund most of those costs.
So we're good till November with the existing contingency. Are you anticipating we'll have to revisit that if there's extensions beyond November?
I would imagine we would, but just to let you know, the contingency, there's a lot of items in there that won't be settled for probably at least a year out from actually going into service, because there's a lot of variations where we're determining the value with the RTG, what it's cost them and what we're going to pay and so on. So there's a lot of work that still has to go into before we know what the final expense is going to be against the contingency. But right now, no, it's not overspent. It has significant commitments against it, but it's
okay. The concern I had when I first started hearing about the delay would be that to avoid penalties or costs or rush to complete, that somehow safety may get sacrificed in this. And whether it's the testing for safety or safety protocols being put in place for when it's running. And I'm getting from what you're telling us, but I'd love to hear it from a direct question. Can you assure us and the citizens that the safety testing and measures will not be negatively impacted by this delay, that we will still keep a robust protocol going there?
Mr. Mayor, I have to give the city manager a piece of paper when I feel comfortable that every condition's been met, and I can assure you if safety has not been met 100%, I will not be recommending that the service be deployed.
And my last piece to this is, we see what happens when the current O-train goes down and the impacts for mobility for people in the community. I would appreciate the delay if it means that we're not going to get those kinds of impacts. That once it starts running, it's going to keep running, and we won't be looking at a couple of days a week trying to figure out how to move people across town because the train's not moving.
Well, one of the things with any system, I cannot guarantee you 100% performance, and the train system will go down like any other major city and around the world. But when I list all those hundreds of activities that we've been doing behind the scenes, we have a whole team that's building out what's called a bus bridging program, which is when the Confed line goes down, and it will go down. How do you deploy buses to parallel the route so that while that disruption is affecting the service, you can still move people? And as I've described it to everybody, whether it's Toronto, New York City, Paris, whatever, when their system goes down, you'll have the exact same situation there. People will choose to either get out and jump on those detour buses, or they'll go use Uber, taxi, walk, bike, all those things. And yes, it'll be challenging and difficult because we carry a lot of volumes, but you put together a comprehensive plan with the information that's part of the Ready for Rail campaign. We actually have a whole section on what happens if the system goes down, and you're going to see signage at the stations, special stop locations and so forth like they do in Vancouver and so forth.
Now, my last question is going to be, with changes in December to the bus routes in preparation for conversion to the trains, I think they were planning at that point in May or June, we saw some of the routes I saw in my area. I know Councillor Harder's not here today, but we've had good conversations that she's experiencing the same thing. Routes that we anticipated a couple of minutes delay at most are now talking, we're getting reports back that they're half-hour, 45-minute delays. So we've more than doubled the commute time for people. Are we going to be able to do anything about that if this is going to delay into November? Because to ask people to go through that for a whole year is a lot more different than just hang on for a month or two. And
yeah, it's a great question. No, of all the hundreds of moves that we've done on bus routes, we have some out there that are experiencing some pain. I know you are. I know Councillor Shirelli. I know Councillor Harder and Mr. Scrimger, who I believe is with me today. Him and Troy Charter have that list. And the mission is to fix it now, irrespective of what's going on with the LRT piece. We need to take care of those customers and see what we can do, and then hopefully that fixes it so that the pain is reduced all the way to launch of LRT.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Engelai, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I want to tackle first the million-dollar question so we can get a bit more clarity here. I guess what I'm looking at is what's occurred here with the change of the date and the notice given and all that. Is the city in any way renegotiating the deal, or was this I'm not going to say remedy, this option, if you will, available in the original contract with RTG, that they could give notice that they couldn't meet the date, and therefore a different process kicked in, and maybe legal can help with that?
Yes, Mr. Chair. First off, I want to assure the committee that there is no renegotiating of this contract of what has taken place. And if I can bring members back to Mr. Manconi's technical briefing in December, which is when we first brought forward this issue, excuse me, on November 24th, RTG was required to provide us with notice of the RSA date. At that point in time, they provided us with a letter that, in our opinion, in our engineer's opinion, in our professional opinion, in our legal opinion, they figuratively or approximately said, we're going to meet the May 24th date, subject, of course, to delay events and other things in the contract. Now, in very, very simplistic terms, staff could have said at that point in time, that's great, we're going to let everything go, and if you miss it on May 24th, on May 25th, you owe us $1 million. We do monitor this contract, we are looking at it, and we knew at that point in time it wasn't in the city's best interests just to play a wait-and-see game. So Mr. Manconi and his team were very engaged. We did not believe, from a legal perspective, that notice to us on November 22nd was compliant. So we wrote back and told them that and engaged in these discussions, because what we are seeking is very much a realistic date that we can inform both committee and council on and how to proceed. But no, there has been no redoing or adjusting the contract at this point in time. Mr. Qasim Salim is a partner with Borden Ladner Gervais, and I'll turn it over to him if he has anything extra to add.
Thanks, Rick. No, I thought that was a good summary of what the state of the contract is, and I think it is certainly fair to say there's no renegotiation of the contract. This was contemplated by the provisions of the contract.
Okay, thank you for that. So in short, there was never an opportunity to collect $1 million twice, in effect.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Now, to Mr. Manconi, the process that you laid out is really two-step. In other words, we get the keys, so to speak, from RTG, and then there's a delay between then and when we can open the door to the public. And you talked about the reliability and the safety. I'm wondering if you can paint us a bit of a picture, though, in a bit more detail than your presentation. So you get the keys on November the 2nd. What do you and your team then do in order to make sure that the system is going to be reliable and, more importantly, is going to be safe when it opens on whatever that date later in November? So walk us through the steps that you'll be taking to that the system we're going to get when you hand that piece of paper to Mr. Kanalakis is a system that is going to be reliable and as I say, more importantly, is going to be safe for all the users.
Certainly. First and foremost, there should be absolutely no surprises on the system reliability and the system safety. Because we're there for the trial running with them. The trains that you see going up and down the line right now, those are our operators in those vehicles. So we've been in there since those trains are running. So all of that will have been completed. And if I can use the analogy back to a new house, you're moving, you get the keys to your new house, you don't immediately have the mover there moving in within an hour. You're in there, you're getting familiar with it, you're checking all the systems, you're thinking about where you're laying out your furniture, all those things. So there's that familiarization of the system. Because while our operators will be out there, we also have other people that need to be looking at it. We'll be doing some trial and some mock-up scenarios with customers and so forth to triple check all of the systems. So really it's the system's been turned over. It's fully compliant, safety, reliability, all those issues. We have a clear line of sight on the minor deficiencies that Councillor Deans was talking about, and our staff are fully aware, mobilized, and into the system and ready to go for launch. So there should be no surprises there in terms of what needs to be done. And then we're practicing and repracticing to make sure that we've got everything perfect.
So in that process, in that window, what would you say is the biggest challenge? What do you foresee? Is it the integration of all the systems? What's going to be the thing that you're focused on the most in order to give the go-ahead to Mr. Kanalakis, who will say, on board, everybody?
The thing that keeps us up at night in terms of what the focus needs to be is the system integration. We have and this is, a world-class system. When I say that, it's because the sum of the parts make it that. You have a great builder, you have a great vehicle. The Alstom Citadis is a fantastic vehicle. You've seen it out there. We have a Thales control system. They're world leaders in that regard. And all those systems associated with the controls on where those trains go and how they stop and the loads and the capacities that they have to do are working. And all of those back office systems give the customer a intuitive, outstanding experience when they enter into those stations and get on those trains and go and do the reverse going home. So the system integration is the piece to watch, safety, compliance, and reliability. It's those three buckets.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Cloutier, please.
Merci, Monsieur le maire, et merci au conseiller Aigle de poser plusieurs des questions que je voulais poser. Mr. Manconi, thank you for the presentation. So RSA date is November 2nd, and do I understand that we expect to have people riding on the train on or about November 30th?
That's correct. By November 30th, we'll be having people running on it, if everything goes well.
Okay. Just further on, you said that the system will be compliant, and that includes system integration and automation, which I understand is the complexity of the system. Will you be testing that between November 2nd and 30th, or do you expect that, is it RTG to deliver, it is compliant, the software systems, the electronic systems are working well, talking to each other?
It's all on them. However, what we've done here, and it's very innovative, is that we have been part of the journey with them in terms of we've infused staff into the testing and commissioning process much earlier than you typically do. Some jurisdictions choose to wait and see, and you get the keys handed over to your new house. We've chosen not to do that. We're there with them as partners. So we're in the vehicles, we're looking at, but all of the requirements to meet those obligations of testing and commissioning rest with them. They go through what's called a pre-trial phase, so they're running and debugging, and then they need to meet a certain set of criteria. It's a fixed number of days that they have to run uninterrupted, meeting certain minimum requirements, and it's a pass or fail within that. Once they get through that trial running period, those prescribed days and the prescribed criteria, that means they've passed through all that, and the safety auditor can sign off if he or she is pleased with everything that they see.
Êtes-vous en mesure de m'éduquer sur la responsabilité de Transport Canada dans cet environnement de testing? It's a rail system. I think it falls under the jurisdiction of Transport Canada, but they have signed over some responsibilities to our city. What are the responsibilities of Transport Canada within that November testing period?
Transport Canada n'a pas des intérêts dans cette date, c'est pas une obligation. Ils nous donnaient la responsabilité, ils ont délégué cette autorité à la ville. On a une responsabilité d'avoir les audits, safety audits, et des rapports à Transport Canada, je pense, les premiers 6 mois et 12 mois de l'opération. Je ne suis pas correct avec ça, je vais checker ça. Mais ils ne sont pas intéressés en la date quand on commence le service de revenu.
Okay, so they're not interested in the date, but they are interested, they do have responsibility. Have they signed off that completely to the city, that if we're okay, they're okay? Will they be, my question is, will they arrive on November 16th or something and say, this isn't right?
No, I don't believe they're interested in the RSA date. We will triple check that, of course, but there's nothing that I've seen or heard that they're interested in that. They're interested in the compliance audit of the delegated authority to the city, and I'm going to ask Mr. O'Connor to comment on that because he's been leading the hiring of the independent safety auditor.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor. As part of the process from a couple of years ago, Council delegated to the hiring panel the authority to interview individuals to take that very important post of the compliance officer. We are currently trying to wrap up that initiative right now, and we're hoping to have within the next few weeks an announcement for Council on it.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connor. In that testing phase in November, if we find that it's and I understand it will be running the trains and the doors open, the doors closed, loading speeds, is there a possibility that if that doesn't go as well as we expect, that there be a further delay of the November 30th date? And by that time, will have RTG fully complied with their contract and any further costs be on us?
Mr. Mayor, I need to clarify, there will not be testing in November. The testing occurs way before that, and that RSA date of November 2nd means they've gone through all of the testing, and the safety auditor has signed off on that. So we're not in testing mode in November. The system's ready to go. They're handing it over to us. We're doing our final checks and familiarization and things like that, and double checking things and agreeing on the minor deficiencies. Testing, if we're in November and we haven't passed testing, we'll know well before that. We're going to know in the summer where they are on pre-trial, and then as we approach, that's that last slide I was talking about, we're going to watch them, monitor them, because it's on them to get to November 2nd.
Okay. So maybe I could find out a little bit more offline, or Council or my colleagues, what we'll be doing in November. I use the word testing, you use the word checking, seems to me, but acknowledge the bulk of it will be done. In November, we could be tempting winter. What are the plans if there is an early winter in November in terms of running parallel LRT bus, keeping the detours in place, keeping the buses running on the 417? Could you talk us just a little bit about that transitional, now that we might have a weather impact?
Certainly. Weather impact or not, we were always planning to, and we're going to share this as part of the Ready for Rail campaign, we're going to run parallel bus service for a few weeks. We don't have the exact dates mapped out. Now that we do, we'll map that out. And perspective of weather, in the event that the system went down in the first couple of days or so forth, we didn't want to leave our customers hanging. So we will run parallel service for a few weeks. With respect to overlaying either the potential of winter or an early winter, one of the slides I talked about, a maintenance regime and a maintenance plan. RTM has filed a comprehensive maintenance plan. There's a whole section dedicated to winter maintenance that focuses not just on traditional winter maintenance, but we've shared with them our winter climate data and so forth. So freezing rain events, what are they going to do? We've thrown a bunch of scenarios at them in terms of what we're looking at, and we've also done comparators with other jurisdictions that have winter climates. You may recall Boston went through a very difficult winter a few years ago where they were shutting down systems. A lot of lessons learned from that on their LRT system, which we've incorporated into the plans to RTM. So there's a winter plan that they have to prescribe to, and there's parallel service irrespective of the date that we launch.
Just one or two more questions. Given the construction through the summer, and this question is perhaps for Monsieur Gontier, will this delay into November impact any of the construction on the 417 or on Queen Street or other streets in the city, given the delay in revenue availability dates? Any impact on our construction schedules through the summer?
Mr. Mayor, as Manconi already indicated, we work very closely with Transportation Services in terms of coordinating all of our works. So basically, the information that we have right now is being taken into consideration in terms of the works that are planned. Even when we plan to work, those impacts are already being felt, so those are elements that we already build into basically the coordination process. If there's things that do come up, basically we work very closely together to make sure that basically we minimize the impacts to the residents and to the traveling public.
Okay, so we'll hear about that as we just got this date. We'll hear about that as we lay down the plans for infrastructure building during the summer. Councillors and the city will hear about that.
If there are specific cases, we will definitely report that, especially to the board councillors. At this point, we're not anticipating that.
Okay. Just further to Councillor Brockington's questions, it is the impact on stage 2 is very important, and I will be interested to find out exactly what the impacts are. Belfast Yards in my is phase 2 construction is already underway and imagine is not impacted by this date at all. So, but the domino impacts are important. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your presentation. Thank you, Mr.
Great, merci, conseiller. Councillor Chiloshenko, please.
Yes, thank you. Many of the questions have now been covered by my colleagues. The fourth or maybe the fifth to ask about phase 2. Quite specifically, though, I recall that during various briefings over the past year or so, and even at discussions here at committee, there was something to the effect of taking advantage of the expertise that is here in the city with the existing, frequently, international companies who've been doing this kind of work for a while, and that we would want to take advantage that as we move to phase 2. I cannot recall if that was purely for the design or whether there was any kind of a commitment or perhaps just a hope that we would take advantage of them. Can you remind me whether there are any contractual agreements with companies that are the consortium as a whole or companies that are part of the consortium doing the work right now where we are committed to those same companies doing work on phase 2?
Yes, and that's why I believe there's no impact. It's a great question. So the Alstom trains have been ordered for stage 2, so that order's been placed. The Belfast Yard that Councillor Cloutier was just talking about, the expansion is already underway. You can go see the superstructure, it's already in place there. There's numerous discussions with towers. We want the same controls on stage 2, so that's going on with the stage 2 team. So we have OLRTC, RTG, all those companies within that consortium engaged. They're active in the bidding process and so forth. And where we went with the directives, we've already done that. So that's why the risk to stage 2. I don't see anything out in terms of the construction element. The key things that we needed to move on, we've moved on, and that was the vehicles and the expansion to the yard, which has clearly been moved forward. So we've leveraged the expertise, and they're engaged because they like Ottawa, they like the project, and they like the build.
Thank you. I'm glad they like Ottawa. I do too. I guess the question is, do we like them? Do we like them enough to continue with them? And that's really where I'm getting at, is if we reach the point where either there is an insolvency, and I know that's remote, but it's always there, or our relationship deteriorates as we try to bring this. Are we locked into anything that we might regret?
So the short answer is no, but I do want to comment on do we like them? If you look around the world or just North America and look at where projects of this complexity are, parking the sinkhole, which was a major event. We are the envy of the industry in terms of how this project has been procured, the consortium that's at the table, the vehicles that you're getting, the controls, the state-of-the-art stations and so forth. We are very engaged with RTG. While there's been some challenges, there always are, they've done a phenomenal job of stepping up to the challenge of that sinkhole. The product that we get at the end is what everybody's got their focus on, because it will transform this city forever in a very, very positive way, not just from a mobility, but from an environmental, an economic development, intensification and so forth, everything that the mayor spoke about in his opening comments. There are many projects around the world, just go to the U.S., and they are behind, and they haven't had a sinkhole. They've had other issues to deal with.
I think that's very much the case. I'm glad that we're only now, whatever it might be, 9 months out, 10 months out, when we are facing a possible delay, because I think of many projects just in North America alone where earlier in the process they were already talking a year or two delays and massive cost overruns. So, of course, fingers crossed, knock on wood, and all that, I think we're in a, relatively speaking, a very good place. But I'll come back to the same question then, which is, imagine this consortium goes insolvent because the cost impacts of the delay or some other factor is too great. Are there any contracted parts of the consortium where we have to go back out to rebidding and find someone else to come in and do phase 2 work?
We have no indication and no concerns that they will become insolvent. There's nothing indicating that. Quite the opposite, they're fully engaged. There's people here over on my left that are involved in the stage 2 negotiations. Mr. Gilbert, maybe I'll get him to comment. He's involved in P3s around Canada. Maybe he can just jump in and give his perspective on stage 2. There's no concerns, there's nothing signaling to us that the organization has in any way any problems.
Thank you, Mr. Marconi. I think that's correct. To date, the Rideau Transit Partnership has not given us any indication. I think the significant equity dollars that they all have at risk is something that buttresses us from that concern. That's in the many multiple millions of dollars of equity that they have in this project that they will never want to put at risk. In fact, they were looking anxiously toward the equity returns that they will achieve from the 30-year maintenance contract for the entire expanded system. Stage 2 is complete, so we've had no such indications, as Mr. Manconi has said.
I hear that and I get that, and I'm glad. I come back to the question I haven't quite had answered yet. So let's put aside entirely insolvency. Are there members of this consortium that are already contracted to be doing work on phase 2, work that has not yet been done?
Yes.
Okay, and can you describe some key ones?
OLRTC is doing the Belfast expansion yard. Everything's tracking well on that. The superstructure is up. They're going to have that enclosed. It'll be ready for the vehicles. Alstom is building the vehicles. Thales is involved in discussions with RTG and with our legal team.
And possibly I should know this, the actual construction work then of the lines and future tunneling, below grade work are similarly, have we contracted this consortium, or is that still to be, those pieces are still to be contracted?
I see what you're getting at, Councillor. No, so that's out in market right now. So the vehicles have been purchased, the expansion has been purchased. Fed line expansion, east and west, is out for market, and this consortium can't bid on that. They've been excluded from that because they have other parts of it, the maintenance agreement and the vehicles and so forth. But that's out in active bidding process right now. There's 3 bidders that are being assessed that have been shortlisted, and then the north-south extension is on market. So it's all out in the marketplace, and that's going to be a future report coming to you.
And there are other companies, domestically, internationally, capable of doing this work if for some reason they're incapable or we choose to sever a relationship?
Yes, and that's out in the marketplace right now, and they're aggressively bidding it as part of the 3 shortlists.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nussbaum, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to staff for the presentation. I have a few questions of clarification on the financial elements, and I guess in my mind I've framed them into three categories. There's the issue of the penalties, there's the issue of the increased cost to RTG as a result of the deferred payments and the $200 million completion payment, etc. And then the third category of financial costs is the impact to the corporation. And so a lot of the questions have been asked, but I just am seeking a little bit of clarification on all three. So starting with the penalty, I think what I heard the city manager say is that the intention is not to levy the $1 million penalty as a result of the May 24th revenue serviceability date not having been met. Is that correct?
Under the, and legal can kick in, under the terms of the project agreement, the penalty does not kick in for May 24th because they gave us a new RSA letter that says November 2nd within the terms of the prescribed contract.
Okay, and I guess where I'm a little bit confused and puzzled point is staff provided some written answers to some questions that I put to them at the end of the year, which were very helpful. Let me just read a couple of sentences from the staff. As of January 11th, at no time have staff agreed to revise the revenue service availability date, nor have they agreed to relieve RTG from any of the financial consequences that can flow should RTG fail to meet the RSA date set out in the project agreement, May 24th. Staff have repeatedly advised RTG that the city will be looking to enforce its rights under the permit and that RTG will be accountable for any failure to meet its obligation under that agreement. So the way I read that is, as of January 11th, staff were saying they have not agreed to revise the RSA date and they have not agreed to relieve RTG from the penalties, given that they meet that date as set out in the project agreement. Did something change between January 11th and today whereby staff have now agreed to a new RSA date?
Mr. Mayor, the questions that the council is referring to were posed to me, and the response that's being read is my response. So I'd like to provide an opportunity to clarify how it's being interpreted, because the process was on November 24th, as you heard from our legal team, we were to receive a letter 6 months in advance of May 24th confirming the date or not. If they didn't give us a letter made on November 24th, they were required to give us a letter by January 24th with a new date. They gave us a letter on the 4th, which was conditional. We didn't accept that letter, and we asked them to give us a letter on January 24th. This memo was written on January 11th. On January 24th, they asked us for an extension because they were still doing a detailed review of their schedule, and they wanted to ensure that they gave us a date that they were comfortable with. They got that extension. We agreed to that extension. Councillor has repeatedly, through his questions, basically been interpreting this to mean that the city is somehow concurring with the date. And I repeatedly have been saying that that is a wrong interpretation. We have not been concurring with any dates. The RSA date is a date that RTG is required to give to the city under the project. They gave us that date. Did we go in and look at their schedule and Mr. Manconi say, did we do due diligence? So we're comfortable with what that date is so that we don't receive a date that we believe they're incorrect and we can push back on? Yes, of course we did. We had to do that due diligence to be able to give our council confidence that we believe that they are right, November 2nd is correct. But we have no obligation to concur, agree, support, or anything regarding any date they give us. It's on them. And the P3 agreement was structured that all the risk is on them too. So why would we accept any risk? So we'd have any of our rights, anything that is in that agreement, or accepted any risk from RTG because they've given us a new RSA date of November 2nd.
Mr. Mayor, you can excuse me from my confusion. If May 24th, 2018 was the revenue service availability date set out in the project agreement, after which the contract was clear that a penalty of $1 million could be applied should that date not be met,
memo in front of me that says staff have not agreed to relieve RTG from any of the financial consequences that can flow should RTG fail to meet the revenue service availability date set out in the project agreement, unquote. You can excuse me for being a little bit confused as to, given that the RSA date has now been moved, and given that there is no intention of applying the $1 million as a result of the postponement of the RSA date, again, reason to want to understand exactly for what reason, what the rationale was, and there may be a very good one, but what was the rationale for why staff have made the decision, apparently, to not apply the penalty that was available to them under the project agreement, given that the project date, the RSA date in the project agreement had been May 24th and has now been subsequently moved.
Mr. Mayor, it's incorrect. Staff have not made the decision not to apply the $1 million. And I'm going to ask our legal team to reference the parts of the PA, the project agreement, that allow RTG to give us a new date under the contract, which then creates the new milestone date of which the penalty would apply if they should miss the new date. So, legal, could you please clarify that the precondition on May 24th is that they give us a new letter with the new date, therefore which changes the penalty?
Thanks. That's correct, and the project agreement reference, for those who do wish to review that, is section 26.7, but Mr.
Can you bring the microphone closer? Just pull it over. Pull it closer.
Apologies. I'll start again. Mr. Kanalakis, I think, has given a very good description of both what's gone on factually and what occurs under. To the extent it's helpful for anyone, there is a specific section of the agreement which deals with this. It's section 26.7. But again, I think Mr. Kanalakis has given a very good description of what's gone on.
And so maybe a question to the legal staff. So in the project agreement, was there a date of May 24th, 2018 as the revenue service availability date?
Yes, that's correct.
And was there the option, or was there the tool available to the corporation to apply a penalty of $1 million if that revenue service availability date was not met?
Only in the instance where RTG has given you notice that that is the revenue service availability date, and then either fails to meet that date or gives you subsequent notice that a different date will apply. Based on the description from Mr. Kanalakis, was not the case here.
Okay, so what you're saying is it was clear that the minute that they gave notice to us by November 24th that they would not meet any subsequent date that they established. I mean, let's just say for the sake of argument, they said it's going to be May 24th, 2019. At that stage, we would be in the same situation where no penalty could be applied. Is that correct?
I apologize, I missed the second half of that question, but I'll try to address it nevertheless. The $1 million penalty is really keyed against notice being given of when RSA is going to be achieved. I think as Mr. Kanalakis and Mr. Manconi and Mr. O'Connor have explained, an original letter received in November was conditional. The city then worked with RTG to establish a letter that was received yesterday, which confirms an RSA date from RTG of November 2nd. If the date is now not met, that's when the $1 million liquidated damage applies. If that date is revised, that's when that $1 million liquidated damage applies. And there also bears noting that there is an ultimate long stop date in this agreement, which is 1 year following the RSA date. That's when revenue service is to be achieved. Otherwise, you enter the world of defaults under the agreement.
Okay, so if, for the sake of argument, if RTG had said the new RSA date is going to be May 23rd, 2019, that would have been allowed under the project agreement and the city would not have been able to apply a penalty. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. My next question, back to my original frame, is just a little bit to understand the consequences for the corporation. And again, I'm following up on a few questions that the treasurer answered. But it's been acknowledged that as a result of the fact that RTG will not be meeting the RSA date in the contract, there are costs incurred by the city, or that will be incurred by the city, both on the increased cost side, so from running buses longer and all of the various factors that Mr. Manconi outlined, and also on the revenue side, there were expectations of a bump in ridership, which are now not going to occur. I was a bit confused by the treasurer's answer. What will be the mechanism through which the city will recoup those costs? It wasn't entirely clear to me.
We're going to use the agreement framework to recoup those costs, and we've signaled repeatedly to RTG that any incremental costs will be directed to them, and they need to recoup those, and we're itemizing all those as we speak.
But there was a suggestion that would come out of the project contingency, or is that? No, that's coming out of a separate, so that will be, is that in the project agreement? So if you provide an itemized list of the reduced revenue and the increased costs, you hand it over to them, they say, thank you very much, we'll pay you every penny of this, or what's the process under the contract?
So the contract is clear on we control milestone payments and that RSA big payment at the end of the process and so forth. We have told RTG we're itemizing all those things. We're going to sit down and work with them, and we will use every and all tools available at our disposal through the project agreement, including the milestone payment adjustments if we have to, and we're going to have a discussion with them on how we recoup those costs. But the important thing is that we are making every attempt to ensure that we recoup every one of those, and the project agreement sets out the framework. There's multiple things in there that we can leverage: liquidated damages, there's the milestone payment, and then there's the maintenance agreement payments that they're not going to be getting, including profit and so forth.
Okay, maybe a question for legal, just so that I understand. In the case where RTG says, actually, City of Ottawa, we're not really interested in reimbursing you for your additional costs and your lost revenue, specific clauses in the contract that speak to the requirement of RTG to reimburse the city for increased cost and lost revenue due to an extension of the RSA date?
I think to be clear, there's no specific clause in the project agreement that would address this perfectly, but there are several indemnity provisions, there are several set-off provisions, and I think this is why Tony describes it as the framework of the project agreement will be used as between the parties to discuss the impacts and the direct costs that the city is facing as a result of these delays. And ultimately, all of that leverage and discussion will take place, and the framework of the project agreement will parties to a result that ultimately, I think, as Mr. Manconi is indicating, the city will have to be 100% comfortable that it has, on balance, achieved the right result with those costs.
Should RTG not agree with the city's assessment or assignment both of increased cost and lost revenue, what is the mechanism through which the city would insist, to put it mildly, that those costs be paid?
The project agreement, again, provides a wonderful that, in that there is an entire schedule that deals with disputes amongst the parties and the process under which both parties will proceed to resolve those disputes, including senior level management discussions, mediation, arbitration, and ultimately other remedies that you might expect in a dispute resolution context. And so it'll be free for either RTG to take a different position or the city to take a different position, but thankfully the agreement does provide the framework to resolve those disputes.
Okay, thank you. And then the last category I mentioned was the cost to RTG. As a result of the extension of the revenue serviceability date, will the city be providing cash payments between the May 24th date and the November 3rd date?
Yes, we will. There's a milestone payment that's outstanding right now. We're looking at where they are on that. With every payment, though, as we've done in the past and we'll continue to do, is that we will assess the completed works out in the field, we come to an agreement, and we make the payment accordingly. With the P3 environment, one of the things you want to do is ensure that the cash flow continues to proponent, but that you're not paying them for work that they have not completed, and that RTG knows that's our position. That will continue to be our position. There's a redistribution of the payments that we need to look at, and how we map that out is part of the ongoing discussions right now, including that RSA date milestone payment that I told you about in terms of the incentive for them to complete that.
And as a result of the extension of that date, so that payment only now has to be made on November 3rd, is that correct?
There is an amount that's booked to that right now. It's commercially confidential, and we will look at how that gets dragged out to November 2nd. But yes, there will be an RSA date on November 2nd that we will bookmark so that they drive for that.
Thank you very much for the answers, and thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Nussbaum. Conseiller Monette, s'il vous plaît.
Many of the questions have been answered. Just want to go back to start time for phase 2. Obviously, you're quite confident that there's no delay to the start time, but we're seeing 6 months of unanticipated delay for phase 1. Will that translate in any way in the completion time frame for phase 2?
No, it won't, Councillor.
It won't. What type of updates will be provided, I guess, for the remaining portion for phase 1? And also for phase 2 as we move forward, like will it keep coming to FEDCO for reports? And do you have a timeline where it will be every month or every 2 months? Has that been set at this time?
Yes, we're going to continue with our quarterly report. One coming out for year-end shortly. All of the governance continues to report to FEDCO on stage 1 and stage 2. You've approved all that, including the administrative functions in terms of the governance, the executive steering committee, and so forth.
Great. There's critical factors that happen, and hopefully not a major one like the sinkhole that we faced. Will that be brought up immediately to and council, or will it just be held off until your 3-month report?
No, if there's anything that's major in nature, we'll be advising the chair of FEDCO and then reporting out accordingly.
Okay. And for phase 2, it will be the same. We'll be going to FEDCO and reports as to how it's moving along. How is that planned?
That's correct. The governance for that has been approved, and we'll continue to report out quarterly on all the elements that are in that quarterly report. And obviously, staff continue to be available if any member of council has any questions.
Okay, appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Blais, please.
Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor, and certainly I think it's been a very interesting, thoughtful discussion today. Just want to clarify a couple things. With the new RSA in November, does the 6-month clock restart? Like, are we going to get a notice in May or early June of the 6-month for the new RSA? And is there an additional allowance now for them to change that RSA date again while avoiding the $1 million?
No, there isn't provision for a further notice to confirm the November 2nd date. The notice that the city received yesterday is the notice of the RSA date. To address the second part of the question, it's now that the $1 million liquidated damage payment is in play. If that date changes, that's when the $1 million liquidated damage is payable.
Perfect. And so there's been a lot of discussion about liquidated damages, penalties, et cetera. I think what it boils down to is people want to know what the consequences are, because certainly there are consequences to residents in the delay. What are the consequences to the proponent in the delay? And I kind of look at how I, discipline my son. I can ground him, I can put him on a timeout, I can not give him his allowance. I rarely ask him to give his allowance back to me. And so I guess, to steal a line from Denzel Washington, explain it to me like a 4-year-old, how is the proponent being disciplined and or consequenced as a result of this change in schedule? What's the real impact to them?
Mayor, thank you to the council for the question, because I think that we've been focusing on the word And I just want to go back to one of the principles that Mr. Manconi presented, that this is a P3 agreement where the risk is clearly on the private sector proponent to bear the risk of the cost of the project. And we're focusing on penalties, but these companies bid on this project, and there are three large international companies, Ellis Don, Dragados, and SNC Lavalin, three huge companies. They bid on the project to make profit, and they're not non-profits, and they didn't bid on the project just to do the citizens of Ottawa a favor. They have built into a profit margin into their proposal. They built that profit margin on the basis that they'd be complete by May 24th. When they miss May 24th, the real consequence to them is that they don't get their equity payments. They don't get money to pay their interest costs. They don't receive their maintenance payments, which they count on to be able to pay their interest costs and the equity to the shareholders. They have to maintain construction costs, so all those people that you see working on the site for another 5 to 6 months, they have to pay them, they have to pay the overtime, all the materials, everything that's out there, they have to continue paying that. So they are being hit in their pocketbook for each day that goes by past May 24th that they can't run for the profit. So the real consequence to them is they make less profit than they otherwise would have, and that happens to them because they assume the risk, including paying for the sinkhole. The city hasn't put a penny into the sinkhole, which is tens of millions of dollars to repair. All those 300 cement trucks that showed up in that 24-hour period were all paid by RTG and the consortium. All the costs to repair the sinkhole were all paid by them. So what we got in return for the premium we paid in the contractor, premium I should say, the way the contract was structured, is we got a guarantee that the City of Ottawa taxpayers wouldn't be accountable, responsible, and have to pay for things that go bump in the night, like a sinkhole or like a construction delay. All those costs fall back to the consortium, and that eats into their profits. And that is the significant consequence to them. That hurts more than any penalty we can put in, because they're not getting the money they need to pay themselves back and to ensure that their profit margin is maintained.
Okay, thank you.
So it's safe to assume then the impacts, the profit loss, the impact to the direct cost to fix the sinkhole and everything you just described is exponentially greater in your understanding of these things, exponentially greater than the $1 million.
Well, it's significant. The $1 million that was written into the contract, years ago when it was done. But the contract basis is on the foundation of they paid for the risk. We paid for the risk, I guess, is a better way to put it, and it's exponentially greater. We're talking tens of millions of dollars of consequence to their bottom line. And just think about it, if you got to run your operation 6 months more than you anticipated, just think of what the cost is on that line to keep all those people out there, and you have to pay, but you're not getting any more dollars to the city because it's a fixed price contract.
Right, Councillor Deans.
Okay, I just have a couple of follow-up questions as a result of the conversation. The first one is, you talked about the costs of the sinkhole and they're bearing that. We have no concern or no fear whatsoever that when all is said and done, they won't litigate to try and recover some of the costs from the municipality of that sinkhole?
Mr. Mayor, there's dispute mechanisms in the contract that have been anticipated in case they dispute it. They are making an insurance claim for the sinkhole, and I would imagine that that discussion with their insurance agent, their insurance company, will determine whether they wish to seek any damages from the city. But the two reports that we both have conducted, independent reports that we conducted, show that it wasn't the fault of the city that the sinkhole happened. So we think they have a very weak case to be able to put this back on the city when they happen to be tunneling in the exact spot where the sinkhole happened. So is there a possibility? What we had talked about when we were discussing this in our own internal team is that does the contract prevent someone from filing a claim or starting litigation against the city? Absolutely not. We can't account for that, but we believe we're well protected in terms of the various things that we're exposed to.
Okay, but there is a possibility if their costs continue to escalate, they're not getting more money, that they may decide to litigate.
Anybody has that option, as do we, litigate against them.
Okay, and I just wanted to just follow up a little bit more on what happened to change the date. So that section 26.7 of the project agreement said they had to provide us 6 months prior written notice in order to allow them not to meet the date in the fixed date contract. Is that right?
To provide 180 days prior notice whether or not they would meet the May 24th date. So they always had the option of saying that they would not meet the May 24th date.
So it wasn't really a fixed date contract because they could all providing 180 days prior written notice.
Yes, of another date, yes.
Okay. They didn't meet that test, right? The 180 days, they didn't actually provide us written notice till what, the end of January, beginning of February?
They provided us, Mr. Mayor, a notice, but it was conditional. It basically said there could be delays, and their contract, our lawyers interpreted the contract to mean they have to give us a specific date that's clear and unconditional and untethered from anything else.
Okay, but the written notice they gave us in November, on November 24th, said conditionally they would meet the May 24th date.
They said May 24th, conditional to delays, event claims, etc. So our lawyer said that's not good enough. We said give us a letter with a specific date, which they were required to do by January 24th. Leading up to January 24th, they asked us for more time to be able to prepare the letter. I agreed to that, and then they gave us the letter yesterday.
Okay, so they didn't actually meet that test. So we could have, if we chose as municipality, triggered the $1 million payment.
No, Mr. Mayor, that's incorrect because they have the option in the contract to give us a new revised date on the letter. Once they give us a new revised date.
Right, but they didn't give us the letter in time, so we gave them some grace.
They would only pay the liquidated damages if they gave us a date and then actually missed the date. So if they said May 24th, then they missed May 24th, they'd owe us money on May 25th. So it doesn't get triggered by the fact that they gave us or didn't give us a letter.
But the project agreement said, in section 26.7 of the project agreement said they had to give us 180 days previous written notice of the date, and they didn't give us that.
What the project agreement says is 180 days in advance, they have to give notice of whether or not they're going to achieve May 24th, 2018. If they don't give that notice, then they're deemed to have given notice that they will not meet May 24th, 2018, in which case there's then an obligation to provide a subsequent notice of when that RSA date will be, and that subsequent notice was received yesterday.
So they met all the obligations?
On the issue of notice, yes. The city didn't accept what was given to them on May 24th. Pardon me, on November 24th.
Okay, so on November 24th, I'm sorry, maybe I'm just thick, but on November 24th, they gave a notice, said conditionally, May 24th, they will be ready to hand over the system. City said, no, we're not accepting that. And so they came back yesterday, February 5th, said we're changing the date to November, but so they didn't have the 180 days when they actually provided a firm number, and yet that still meets the obligations under section 27.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Anything else, Councillor? Okay, thank you very much. It was a very thorough presentation. I think the bottom line that I got out of this presentation is that staff very much understand their responsibility to ensure that the city and the taxpayers remain whole, that they believe that we have a realistic date of handing over the system to the city on November 2nd, with passenger boarding by the end of November, and that RTG takes on complete and full responsibility for any cost overruns as set in the agreement. So thank you, Mr. Manconi and Mr. Kanalakis and Ms. Similek and Mr. Cripps and our staff from legal for their thorough presentation. Information previously received is before you. Notice the motion for consideration of subsequent meeting. And then you notice the motion. Do we have any written inquiries? Other business? Adjournment. Carried? Thank you. Merci.